So the passage that we're going to read, we have been through before. Tonight we're focusing on verses 9 through 14, and we're going to glean really important information from that paragraph. So I need the first reader of 2021 to read Daniel chapter 8, verses 9 through 14.
I'll go.
Okay, Stacy.
Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. It grew great even to the host of heaven, and some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And a host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering because of transgression, and it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state.
Okay, thanks for reading. Good job. So we are reading about the little horn there. So if you'll remember from December, lesson 8, part 1, we were studying the little horn. And in the context of chapter 8, we had a ram and a he-goat. Remember, the he-goat had a prominent horn. The prominent horn was broken off, and in its place, 4 horns came up. From amongst one of those 4 horns grew a little horn. And that little horn has characteristics that are similar to the little horn of Daniel's 4th beast in chapter 7. So last time we were comparing the little horn of Daniel's 4th beast to the little horn of the he-goat, and we saw a lot of similarities. Also last time, in the last lesson, we looked at the book of 1 Maccabees. It's an intertestamental apocryphal book, and it details the life and the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes. And we saw how he, this Syrian king, fulfilled many of those prophecies of Daniel 8. Word for word, he seems to be the fulfillment of it, and many commentators make the conclusion that he is the little horn. But tonight we're going to look at some evidence that maybe he was simply a foreshadow of the little horn, and the ultimate fulfillment is eschatological. And one of the ways that we're going to understand that is by looking at who he sets himself up against. He sets himself up against the prince of the host. So again, the little horn arises from one of the 4 horns. We've looked at how it points to Antiochus Epiphanes, documented in 1 Maccabees. If you'll remember, Antiochus Epiphanes terminated the daily sacrifices that were functioning in the temple. He outlawed the Jewish law. He made the Torah illegal. He said circumcision was illegal. And he set up an abomination of desolation. That's the exact wording of 1 Maccabees. He set up an idol to Zeus in the temple, and he also sacrificed a pig on the altar. So he also waged a bloody war against the Israelis. So he was a terrible king, and he caused a lot of desolation. But again, some of the clues that we're going to study tonight point to a greater eschatological fulfillment of the little horn than Antiochus Epiphanes. If we take the words of Jesus himself, during the time that Jesus lived, this was from 3 BC to 32 AD, he says that the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet was yet to come. Antiochus Epiphanes was around 165 BC, so his time preceded the time of Christ. So he could not have fulfilled completely the prophecy of the abomination of desolation, because Jesus said it's future to his time. So we know at least after 32 AD. So with that clue, we can look for a greater fulfillment of the abomination of desolation and who that little horn is. And that's what we're really looking at tonight. In Daniel 8:10, there on your notes, it says, and it is the little horn. It waxed great even to the host of heaven. So this little horn is growing up to the heavenly places, right? So it's already a clue of the supernatural character of the little horn. and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. So what Stacy just read, the little horn waxes great. He casts the stars down to the ground and stamps upon them. If we go to Revelation, similar language occurs in Revelation 12. In Revelation 12, verses 3 and 4, we're reading about the great red dragon. He, with his tail, draws a third part of the stars of heaven and casts them to the ground. Now, the stars in Revelation are defined to be angels, okay? So the little horn is trampling on stars. The great dragon of Revelation 12 is casting stars to the ground and trampling upon them. So we also learned last time that the little horn has mighty power, but he does not have power in and of himself. He derives power from some other source. And we looked at Satan being the source of his power, or the red dragon. So we can see a definite correlation there. So Antiochus Epiphanes, as terrible as he was, we can't necessarily say that he waxed up to heaven, grew great, and cast the angels down and trampled upon them. So again, we can look for a greater eschatological fulfillment. That means a fulfillment in the end of days, or the end of time. So in Daniel 8:11, okay, under the title Prince of the Host there, it says, "Yea, he magnified himself even to the Prince of the Host." We're going to look at a couple of things in that one verse, but Prince of the Host is really intriguing. So he, the little horn, magnified himself even to the Prince of the Host. So the question we need to ask is, who is the Prince of the Host? If we can understand who the Prince of the Host is, answering that question may help to reveal the identity of the little horn, maybe beyond who Antiochus Epiphanes was. So we're going to do a little word study. I got a little Hebrew in there for you tonight. So raise your hand if you want to read the Hebrew words. I'll sure let you do that. Let's talk about who is the Prince of the Host. Okay, so it's written there in Hebrew. Just because it's beautiful, we can look at it. Remember, Hebrew reads right to left. So if we want to read that word, the transliteration is next to it, Sar Hasaba. Okay, listen to the word Sar. That's how Sar in Hebrew is translated prince. But if you think about like a Russian czar, right? A leader, someone who's in power, you can kind of hear the connection there. So the Sar Ha Saba, Ha means the, Saba is host. So we have the Prince of the Host. That phrase, when we look at where that particular phrase occurs in Hebrew elsewhere in the Bible, is really revealing of the identity of the Prince of the Host. So the phrase Sar Hasaba, or the Prince of the Host, is the same Hebrew phrase behind captain of the host in Joshua 5. If you remember, Joshua, the Israelites had been circumcised. They had celebrated their last Passover. They ate the last of the manna, and then they ate the first fruits of the promised land just before they were getting ready to enter into the promised land. So when they were going to conquest Jericho, Joshua is met by this really impressive and magnificent being, right? So this is in Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 through 15. So again, Joshua is going to be leading the Israelites in the conquest of the promised land, starting with Jericho, and he sees a man over against him with his sword drawn. And I'm just reading the bold print there. So Joshua sees a man with a drawn sword in his hand, right? And so Joshua is a little bit alarmed, and he says, "Are you for us? Are you against us?" And this man says, "Nay, but as captain of the host of the Lord, I am now come." So the man that Joshua saw with the sword in his hand says, "I'm the captain of the host. I'm the captain of the host of the Lord." Well, that phrase, captain of the host, is Sar Hasaba. Same as prince of the host, right? So the one that the little horn raises himself up against as an enemy, the prince of the host, is the same as Joshua's captain of the host that was standing there with his sword drawn as they entered into the promised land, right? Now, this is a mighty man that Joshua is looking at, but if we keep reading in that passage, the man says to Joshua, "Take your shoes off because you're standing on holy ground." Right? So this indicates that it was more than a man standing there encountering Joshua. The captain of the host and the prince of the host are the same. Now, if we look at the characteristics of Joshua's captain of the host, He was standing there with his sword drawn. Okay, this scene happens again with King David. Okay, point number 2 there. The man with the sword drawn is like the angel of the Lord, not Sar Hasaba. It's Malach Yahweh, angel of the Lord, in David's census splendor. Y'all remember that? David was not supposed to take a census, but he decided, let's number the people, and he sent his servants out and they numbered the people, and it angered the Lord, and so the Lord said, all right, you're going to be punished, and he gave him an option of a punishment. But during this process, David has either a vision or he actually saw there in 1 Chronicles 21:16, the angel of the Lord standing between the earth and heaven. Okay, so Joshua sees the angel of the Lord, and he has a sword drawn, right? And his hand stretched out over Jerusalem. That's a really significant event because the plague is stopped at the threshing floor of Arana, which later becomes the Temple Mount, right? So again, it's significant for a lot of reasons. So the prince of the host is like Joshua's captain of the host who had a sword drawn, and David saw the angel of the Lord with his sword drawn like that. So there's a connection between the prince of the host and the angel of the Lord. Now, when the angel of the Lord or the captain of the host says to Joshua, take off your shoes because you're standing on holy ground, does that make you think of something else that happens in the Old Testament? The burning bush, right? Absolutely. It reminds you of Moses in the burning bush or encountering the burning bush. So point number 3, this angel of the Lord that David sees is like the angel of the Lord who appeared in the burning bush. Okay, so Exodus chapter 3, verses 2 and 4. The angel of the Lord appears to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush, right? So in the burning bush, we have the angel of the Lord, but if you look at that last line, the bold print there, it says, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush. So the angel of the Lord is in the midst of the bush. God calls out from the burning bush. So there weren't 2 in the burning bush, right? There was 1. So that shows that the angel of the Lord and God are one and the same. Because we might say, maybe Joshua just encountered a mighty angel. Maybe David just saw like Michael or Gabriel or something like that, some supernatural spirit from heaven. But Moses equates the angel of the Lord and God. So the prince of the host, who's the same as the captain of the host, who's related to the angel of the Lord, which Moses equates with God, we can see that prince of the host that the little horn lifts himself up against is none other than Jesus, right? The Prince of Princes, the Lord of Lords. Also, we know at the burning bush that God tells Moses, take off your shoes, you're standing on holy ground. So we can also assume, because of the similar characteristics with Joshua seeing the angel, take off your shoes, you're on holy ground, it's probably an appearance of God. Now, what did he look like, right? Joshua said he looked like a man. If he was in the flesh, the image of God is Jesus. So here we have a pre-incarnate appearance of glorious Jesus, right? Now, Moses, page 2, Moses equates the angel of the Lord with God, but Jacob does as well. So point number 4, Jacob equates God with the angel in his final benediction. So he was blessing Joseph and Joseph's 2 sons, and I've highlighted or bold printed 2 words there from Genesis 48. So Jacob is blessing Joseph, and he says, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God which fed me all the days of my life, the angel which redeemed me. Do you see the equation there? God, the angel. So Moses said that the angel in the burning bush was the same as God in the burning bush. And here you have Jacob saying, God of my fathers, the angel which redeemed me. So the angel of the Lord and God are one and the same. Now, every time it says angel of the Lord, question?
This seems kind of similar in some respects to the way it sounds, just not knowing everything. Maybe I should, but it's like the triune God.
Mm-hmm.
So is there some
Yes.
parallel along with that? It's not the same, but is it similar?
Yes, that's a good question. So is this how does this relate to the Trinity, the triune God? So God is three. He's Father, Son, Holy Spirit. God is an invisible spirit, right? But his expression is in the Son. So if we are able to discern the form of God, what does he look like? He looks like Jesus, right? Jesus says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Hebrews 1:3 says he is the express image of God. So anytime you can lay eyes upon God, if he looks like a man, we're looking at the second person of the Trinity, right? So the one who appeared in the burning bush, think about the fourth man in the fiery furnace, right? Protecting Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If you can see him with your eyes, then it's the second person of the Trinity. God, the Holy Spirit, is invisible, right? Again, Hebrews 1:3 says that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. So yes, you can see aspects of the Trinity there. Remember, it says Moses talked with God face to face. Well, whose face was he looking into? It had to be Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, right? And that's probably who David saw. That's probably who Joshua saw. That's the Prince of the Host that we're talking about here. And you can't help but recognize that, the Trinity, right? You notice it there in the Old Testament. So point number 5, as we move forward, there's going to be a connection between the little horn of Daniel 8. Remember, he relates back to the little horn of the fourth beast in Daniel 7. But also there's going to be a willful king or a king of the north that we're going to study in Daniel 11. In Daniel 8:11, it says the little horn is against the prince of the host, right? But in Daniel 11:36, it says the willful king speaks against the God of gods. So if the little horn and the willful king are the same, then the prince of the host and the God of gods are the same, okay? So the enemy of the little horn is Jesus, okay? And do we see that in Antiochus Epiphanes' life? In principle, yes, but as far as direct interaction, no, right? Now, Paul talks about this in the New Testament as well. About the man of sin, about the Antichrist, he says that he's going to oppose God and he's going to exalt himself above God. The little horn is opposing the prince of the host. The Antichrist opposes God and exalts himself above God, right? The willful king is against the God of gods. The Antichrist calls himself God. So the conflict that Paul's talking about, the conflict between the little horn and the prince of the host, the willful king and the God of gods, that's all the same story told from different perspectives, different aspects. So the last point about the prince of the host, in Daniel 8:25, in Daniel 8:11, he's called the prince of the host. In Daniel 8:25, he's called the prince of princes, but it's the same Hebrew, Sar Hasaba. So the prince of princes, Daniel 8:25, it says, he shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. So the little horn is going to stand up against the prince of princes, but the little horn is going to be broken without hand. Now, without hand reminds us of Daniel 2. Remember the rock not cut out with human hands that takes out the statue? That's a supernatural destruction of the Gentile empires of the world. So here, the little horn is going to have a supernatural destruction. He's broken without hand. And we can't really say that happened to Antiochus Epiphanes, right? A supernatural destruction without hands. So even though a lot of the prophecies in Daniel 8 do find at least a shadow fulfillment in Antiochus Epiphanes, they probably point beyond Antiochus Epiphanes to an ultimate eschatological fulfillment. And like we said last time, if you remember lesson 1, way long time ago, Daniel 8, lesson 1, Gabriel repeats 4 times in this chapter, this is for the time of the end, right? He says this comes at the time of the end. It's for the last end of the indignation. The vision shall be for many days. He repeats it 4 times. This is for the time of the end. So a lot of things point to, because the little horn has this supernatural enemy, the prince of princes, that the little horn is also supernatural, right? It's the Antichrist. It's the beast rising out of the sea. So to understand the identity of the little horn, again, we get clues from who the prince of the host is. Okay, that's point number one. Hang on one second.
Does the little horn this time take out Israel to the beautiful land?
So the little horn does, he goes to so the little horn comes out of the fourth horn, one of the four horns. He goes to the west and to the south and to the beautiful land. So Antiochus was the Syrian king ruling over the region of Jerusalem. He was in Jerusalem. He was interacting with the high priest in the temple function there, and he was waging war against the people. We're going to see the same with the Antichrist, coming out of the north, waging war against Israel. He's going to set himself up in the temple at the midpoint of the tribulation. He's going to desecrate the temple just like Antiochus desecrated the temple. And he's going to trample the city for a time, and half a time, right? Times, and half a time, 3.5 years. So yes, he will wage war on Israel. Bill?
So question, it keeps saying broken without hand.
Mm-hmm.
Can you clarify that a little more?
So I understand that to mean that he will be destroyed without natural means. So he's not going to die a natural death. Nobody's going to kill him in war. He is going to be supernaturally destroyed. So Daniel has a vision of the heavenly courtroom, and the judge makes the call that the little horn should be thrown into and destroyed in the fire. So in Revelation, we know that the Antichrist, the beast and the false prophet, will be thrown into the lake of fire, and the dragon will be cooped up in the abyss for 1,000 years. So the supernatural destruction of the beast in Revelation is what I think of when I read, he shall be destroyed without hand, right? Without human hand, natural causes. It's going to be a supernatural event, a judgment of God.
Thank you.
Right? Other questions? Okay, 1 point done. The prince of the host, same as captain of the host, angel of the Lord, God himself. To look upon God is to look at Jesus. The enemy of the Antichrist, of course, is Jesus. So also in that verse, Daniel 8:11, there's something else we need to learn about. It says, yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. So the little horn going against the prince of the host. And by him, by the little horn, the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Okay, now if you're reading the King James Version, anytime you see words in italics in the King James Version, sometimes you have regular words and then something will be in italics. It's simply an insertion by the translators to make the words, the meaning in Hebrew, make sense in English. But the word is not in the original Hebrew. So where we see sacrifice, I went ahead and put it in brackets on your notes. The word sacrifice is not in the Hebrew. Now remember, you can go to Bible Hub, you can look at the Hebrew translation. You don't have to know anything about Hebrew, but you can learn a lot, okay? So sacrifice is not a word in the original Hebrew. The daily is the word, right? If we were to translate the Hebrew literally, we would say the daily, not the daily sacrifice. Now it is definitely connected to the daily sacrifices we're going to see, but it's also connected to a lot more. Now we need to understand what the daily is, because we're going to see it again in Daniel 11:31 and Daniel 12:11. They shall pollute the sanctuary of strength and take away the daily, right? And Daniel 12:11, at that time, the daily shall be taken away. So what is the daily? Okay, we've talked about who is the prince of the host. Let's talk about what is the daily. And again, most translations will say daily sacrifice, daily burnt offering, something like that. So the daily in Hebrew, FYI, is ha tamid. You can see that ha again, that means the, tamid, the daily. Okay? Now it's really important to understand what the daily is to figure out what's going on with the 2,300 days that we're going to read about in a minute. And I really wanted to know those 2,300 days. So you start with a word search. You search the daily, or ha tamid, and it occurs 104 times in the Old Testament. Okay, so if you can look at all of those 104 occurrences, you can learn about what the daily is. But the first 35 occur in the Pentateuch, right? The first 5 books of the Bible: Matthew, Mark, Luke, Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. I'm just making sure y'all are awake. Y'all are looking a little drowsy out there.
We may not be advanced, but we know the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Good job. Good job.
There's no red letters in the Old Testament.
Okay, thanks for clearing that up.
That's how you know.
That's great to know. I'll keep that in mind. All right, so 104 occurrences in the Old Testament, 35 in the first 5 books of the Old Testament. So I started reading those, and I wrote them all down, and I was going to put them in your notes, and I thought, no, that's probably too much information, right? So I have them all written down if you want to look at them. That little website that I have in your notes, that's just a link to Bible Hub, and it takes you to the list of 104. You can read the first 35. It shows the phrase and the near words, and you can get the meaning of hautamid, because I know you're all going to go do that homework, right? So as I read specifically the first 35 occurrences, I tried to come up with an inductive conclusion for what does that mean. So I had all these little different examples. That phrase hautamid is not always translated the daily, okay? Its definition is the continuity. So if you look at the meaning in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, that word means the continuity. So a lot of times when you're reading it in Scripture, it'll say the continual, the continuous. Here we are reading it the daily, the perpetual, okay? So every single one of those occurrences in the first 35 references have to do with the function of the temple and the tabernacle. And we know all about this because we've studied the tabernacle. We've studied the feast days. So that's going to be familiar to us, right? So sometimes that hautamid is translated referring to the showbread on the Sabbath. Remember, the priests were to put the showbread on the table of showbread every Sabbath. They were to replenish it every Sabbath. Sometimes it refers to the lampstand burning from evening to morning. So remember, the high priest had to go in and tend the lampstand, keep it burning from evening to morning, had to put the oil in there, make sure everything was clean. It refers to the high priest wearing his breastplate, carrying the Urim and Thummim, or Urim and Thummim, as we read in Texas, right? 2 lambs, evening and morning sacrifice. That was part of the daily function of the temple. The continual burning of incense before the veil in the holy place. That phrase hautamid that we're considering here refers to the fire on the altar, which was to continuously keep burning, right? Once God's glory lit the fire on the altar in Solomon's temple, it didn't go out. It continuously burned. They always kept it going. The regular grain offering, the pitchers for pouring, the drink offerings, and there's even references to 3 of the feast days: Passover, unleavened bread, and atonement. So the daily in all of these different places was consistently connected to some sort of function in the temple that had to be cared for periodically, continuously, rhythmically, day after day after day after day, like a sine wave. I'm teaching trig right now, right? So it hits a maximum and then it hits a minimum, then it hits a maximum and it does the same thing over. There's a regular, constant rhythm to the functionality of the temple. So we are looking at Daniel 8:11. By him, the little horn, the daily was taken away. What does that mean? Well, we know for sure it is related to the temple function. So in order for these prophecies to be fulfilled, especially the 2300 days, there has to be a functioning temple. And that's something to watch for. In 2 Chronicles 2:4, you get a lot of these different operations in one verse, okay? So in 2 Chronicles 2:4, this is Solomon. He says, "Behold, I build an house to the name of the Lord my God, to dedicate to him and to burn before him sweet incense, and for the continual showbread, and for the burnt offerings, morning and evening, and the Sabbaths, on the new moons, and on the solemn feasts of the Lord our God. This is an ordinance forever to Israel. So I just picked out that verse because you have representatives of all the different daily things that had to be taken care of in the temple or the tabernacle, right? First temple or second temple. So after studying all those occurrences of ha-tamid, which is translated the daily, here three places in Daniel, here's what I came to the conclusion of. Ha-tamid in Daniel 8:11, 11:31, and 12:11 refers to the daily temple functions, and this includes the evening and morning sacrifices. Okay, Erev and Boker, evening and morning. Remember, a lamb was sacrificed in the evening and a lamb was sacrificed in the morning. So the functions of the temple, all of the different things that had to occur, is a lot like a ticking clock going around and around and around. It's cyclical, it's periodic, it's continuous, or like a beating heart. So the functioning of the temple as the heart of Israel and the heart of Jerusalem, it defines, it validates, and it measures the days. We can count the days by the temple. So the prince of the host is Jesus, right? The daily is referring to the functionality of the temple, and that can be as simple as an evening and a morning sacrifice, right? Which is why the translators put that word sacrifice in there for the daily. So once we sort of have that context, then we can begin to understand the timeline of the 2300 evenings and mornings.
Took us a minute to get there, but we did.
I know. It takes me a while to get warmed up. I'll get there eventually.
Jan, in the Episcopal Church, there's something that's called the daily office.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess maybe probably is in the Catholic Church too. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But and I'm not sure it's in the prayer book. It probably is. I can't say, but it likely is. And so that's a continuation or a repeat of that daily thing that was going on here, I believe.
Mm-hmm. I could see that because the temple was the centerpiece of Israel, the centerpiece of the priests. It was the house of God. Now the house of God is the church, right? And there's ministers who continually keep the church functioning, taking care of the people, taking care of the tasks. So you can see why, offering a daily prayer might be called the daily. Yeah. So I would say, yes, that's the remnants of this Old Testament.
Shannon, what temple is this?
Any temple. The scripture...
There is no temple right now.
No, there is no temple right now.
So what does that mean? There's going to be a temple?
Yes. So the 2300 days is dependent on the daily. The daily is related to the functionality of the temple, specifically the evening and morning sacrifices. So in order for this to be completely fulfilled, we've kind of looked at the possibility that the little horn is yet future, the abomination. We know it's future to Jesus. We're looking at this as an eschatological event. For this to be fulfilled, it's dependent on the daily. The daily is related to the functionality of the temple. What should we watch for? The third temple and its functionality, the daily functionality. Now we know in Jerusalem, they've got a high priest, they've got the priesthood in training. They've also started on different occasions offering sacrifices. So they can't do it on the Temple Mount, of course, because there's so much tension. But they have sacrificed lambs. Every year their Passover sacrifice gets a little closer and closer to the Temple Mount. They can't do it on the Temple Mount, but they'll find locations near the Temple Mount. They'll get approval of the police in Israel, right? The guards of the Temple Mount. Can they do this at this location? They'll get all their security set up. And it's continuously moving closer and closer to where the Temple Mount is. I've watched a YouTube video where they were on the Mount of Olives across from the Temple Mount and they sacrificed a lamb. So you see these things starting to emerge in modern events, and these prophecies are dependent on the functionality of the temple. So if we're looking for signs, watching for Jesus' return, watching for the prophecies of Daniel to be fulfilled, part of the recognition of that is going to be seeing the third temple and the continual, right? The daily, the evening sacrifice and the morning sacrifice, the lampstand, the table of showbread, the incense, Okay, all of that stuff. So let's talk about the 2300 evenings and mornings. This comes from still the passage that Stacy read for us at the beginning, the last few verses, 13 through 14. It says, "Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, unto 2,300, the King James says days, most translations stick to the original Hebrew, 2,300 evenings and mornings, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed." Okay?
That's how they used to measure days. It was
Evenings and
morning,
mornings. So, how long shall the vision concerning the daily, the transgression, so on and so forth, and the response is unto 2,300 evenings and mornings. Okay, so what does all of this mean? So the question is posed, how long? A period of time is measured from one specific moment to another. So to find the distance between 2 points, we have to have a specific initial point and a specific terminal point, right? So to find the length of this period of time, and you may want to turn your volume down. To find the length of this specific period of time, there has to be a clear beginning and a clear ending. There has to be a point A and a point B. So the question is, how long until all these things are accomplished, right? Well, what's point A? The first thing that's mentioned, there's a list of 4 things in that passage. The first thing is the daily, okay? That's point A. How long is the vision concerning the daily? The daily is point A. That's ha-tamid. So we're measuring from the temple functionality. You see that? So if we see that, then here comes 2,300 days. And the transgression of desolation. So the second thing there is the transgression of desolation. We're going to learn more about that next week in Daniel 9:27, also known as the abomination of desolation. We've learned that's in the midpoint of Daniel's 70th week. We're going to go over all that again next week. So there's the beginning, point A, the daily. In the middle of something, not the middle of the 2,300 days, but somewhere in the middle, we've got the transgression of desolation. Then, number 3, the sanctuary and the host are trodden underfoot. Okay, now we already learned that the little horn of the 4th beast of Daniel 7 tramples the people for a time, times, and half a time. Okay, so it's referring to that same period. And then finally, point B, the terminal point, the sanctuary will be cleansed. So from the daily to the cleansing is 2,300 evenings and mornings. In that time period, there's the abomination or the transgression of desolation, and there's the trampling of the sanctuary and the people. So this 2,300 days has a clear beginning and a clear ending from the daily to the cleansing. Okay, now let's talk about why it's referred to as 2,300 evenings and mornings, Erev and Boker, not 2,300 days. Okay, some translations just put in a day. So what are these 2,300 days? Some have taken the 2,300 days, which is a little over 6 years, and applied it to the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes. They say that's the length of time that he was trampling Israel, putting the statue of Zeus in the temple. And those 2,300 days they frame his reign, okay, which is a possibility, like an initial fulfillment. Some have equated the 2,300 days with 2,300 years. If you search the 2,300 days, you cannot get away from that interpretation on the internet. It's put out there from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and they measure it from 457 BC to 1844, and they have an interpretation as like a phase of Jesus' ministry in heaven. I don't quite see that. Because I don't see how all of those 4 components fit in, the abomination of desolation, the trampling of the host. But that interpretation is out there. Now, some, and this is what I was checking on whenever I was studying the daily, some take the 2,300 days and divide it by 2. And they say, well, there's an evening and a morning. If there's 2,300 sacrifices, since there's 2 sacrifices a day, then that really means 1,150 days. Now, the way that we see the 2,300 days will affect how we understand Daniel's 70th week in chapter 9. Okay, now I'm not saying I'm right about the interpretation, but what I know is our understanding of this has ramifications for how we view what happens in chapter 9. So the point is, it's important. It's worth studying, right? So I don't think we need to divide 2,300 by 2. And Blake already made the point. He said, well, what about Genesis, right? Evening and morning makes one day. If you think about the account in Genesis, evening and morning were the first day. Evening and morning were the second day. So a set of evening and morning equals one day. So when we say 2,300 evenings and mornings, we're talking about 2,300 days. So those who divide the 2,300 days by 2 and fit it in with Daniel's 70th week, I have a hesitation there because the Bible seems to indicate that an evening and a morning is one day. So 2,300 evenings and mornings is 2,300 days. So why not just say 2,300 days, right? Why did the Hebrew say evenings and mornings? Well, evening and morning is related to the temple function, right? Every evening a lamb was sacrificed, every morning a lamb was sacrificed, like that continual clockwork, the daily functionality. So that tells us that this 2,300 days is directly related to and dependent upon the functionality of the temple. And I'm talking about the third temple, right, that is in the near future. The 2,300 days is measured by the evening and morning sacrifices of the third temple, also pointed to by the daily. Now, when we look at the second temple, okay, there was Solomon's temple, Nebuchadnezzar destroyed it, there was the exiles returned, and they come back and they build the second temple in Ezra and Nehemiah, right? When they build the second temple, they were surrounded by enemies, and they were concerned about this. They don't have their temple up and running, they're surrounded by enemies. So they laid the foundation of the temple, and they immediately started the evening and morning sacrifices. The temple wasn't even built, but it's in Ezra 3:3. It says, they set up the altar on his bases, for fear was upon them because of the people of those countries, and they offered burnt offerings thereon unto the Lord, even burnt offerings morning and evening. So the second temple began its functionality with only an altar and evening and morning sacrifices, no building, just those 2 sacrifices. So again, we're seeing periodically in the news sacrifices occurring in Jerusalem, right? Should we ever see that continually, even if there's just an altar and no temple, that could signify the beginning of the 2,300 days.
Is there anything that you know of that talks about the shifts of the priests that are making the sacrifices? Do they come on in the evening and they don't go home until in the morning?
So the high priest was responsible for every single day the incense, tending to the lamp. But as far as the rotations of accepting sacrifices and offering them on the altar, I do know about the rotations of the families, the 24 courses, but I don't know like their clock hours. That would be something to look into.
It would be interesting if it was evening to morning,
yeah.
If it was morning to evening.
Right. Time is reckoned from evening to morning. Are y'all still here? Okay.
Shannon,
Yes.
if indeed they build another temple, that means they still don't believe in Jesus as the Savior. What about Revelation and the mark of the Lord on them? When does that happen?
So if you think about when we studied the tabernacle, can you hear me? Okay. When we studied the tabernacle, what did we learn about? We learned about Jesus. So when the third temple is built, there will be 2 witnesses. These 2 witnesses are believers. They will be able to interpret the functionality of the temple and how it points to Christ. The 144,000 that are sealed in Revelation 7, I think that's what you're referring to, Paul. they're going to be believers, and they'll be able to look at that temple and interpret it as how it points to Christ. And another thing we need to keep in mind, the millennial temple of Ezekiel 40 to 48, there's another temple that's described in the Bible. That's the time of the millennial reign. So we have a temple with sacrifices on planet Earth when Jesus is ruling from Jerusalem. So a Christian has the tendency to be offended by the sacrifices. How can we make sacrifices? Because Jesus was the sacrifice offered once and for all. It's a done deal. Well, those sacrifices that were in the Old Testament pointed to him. Anything that comes after him is memorial of him. It's not a sacrifice offered for sin, because only Jesus can do that. His sacrifice was the only acceptable one. So we will be able to see a third functioning temple with sacrifices, but that will be used to reveal Christ, just like we learned about Jesus from the tabernacle. Do you have some more thoughts on that, Paul?
No, that's a good answer. I had thought that, they'd have to come around for, in Revelation, to be saved, they'd have to, be stamped by God, by Jesus, understand Jesus as the Savior.
Yes, that's the condition. But there will be those who are saved and taken to heaven, but there will also be natural people who survive the tribulation that go on into the millennium as a natural earthly human, right? Think about the sheep and goats judgment that Jesus talks about. That's at the beginning of that last 1,000 years. He's judging earthly people, right? Okay, let me wrap this up really quickly. This 2,300 days is not like this rogue timeline from Daniel that doesn't make sense in the context of the other timelines of Daniel, because this 2,300 days goes from the daily. It includes the abomination of desolation. It includes the trampling of the sanctuary and the people, and it terminates at the cleansing of the temple, right? And I'm thinking about Ezekiel when a spring lifts up from underneath the Temple Mount and flows in a river to the Dead Sea, right? Think of the cleansing of the temple from the spring that comes underneath, the literal spring that comes up underneath the Temple Mount. So this 2,300 days is related to the time, times, and half a time that we read about for the little horn of Daniel 7:25. The little horn of Daniel 7:25 tramples the saints in the holy city for 3.5 years. The 2,300 days includes that time, right? Because the abomination of desolation, the trampling, was included in one of those 4 points of Daniel 8:14. It's also going to be related to the 70 weeks next week, because the time, and half a time is related to the 70 weeks. There's 2 more timelines given in Daniel. Not 100% sure where they fit. We'll talk about it. 1290 days and 1335 days. So in order to kind of communicate how I'm envisioning this timeline, I was either going to draw one, or I just searched on the internet to find one that most closely matches my understanding of the 2,300 days, and that's the picture that you have on your notes. The only thing that I would maybe have an objection to is that this interpreter runs the 70th week from Passover to Passover, and I would say I'm of the opinion that it goes from trumpets to the Day of Atonement. So that's the only objection. But what you see there is the 2,300 days. It probably starts 250 days into the 7-year tribulation. It spans the midpoint and goes to the end. So we're going to look at how that fits into other timeline prophecies next week. But the point I want to make about the 2,300 days, if we divide it by 2, okay, it becomes 1150 days. Then you can take those 1150 days and you can fit it completely in 1/2 of the tribulation in 3.5 years. It's smaller than half the tribulation. But what I'm understanding from Daniel 8 is that it spans across the midpoint. It goes from the daily, across the abomination of desolation, through the trampling to the cleansing. So it's going to keep that 70th week together as one 7-year period. Okay, this may not make any sense. We'll talk about that next week. Some people take the 70th week and divide it in two, and I think the 2300 days is witness that I don't think we should do that. Okay, so again, we'll talk about that next week. So in preparation for next week, make sure you read Daniel 9. We learned about that a little bit when we did Revelation, but we'll break that down next week. Okay? Did you get all that? I only gave you 3 points: the Prince of the Host, the daily, and the 2300 days.
Well, the expansion from the 3 points.
Yes, I know. I know.
Great.
Shannon, who does the cleansing? The Maccabees did the first cleansing.
Yes, and
Next one.
that's a good point. So those that take the 2300 days and match it up with the Antiochus reign, after he desecrated the temple, that's where Hanukkah comes about, right? The cleansing of the temple is a celebration of, or Hanukkah is the celebration of the cleansing of the temple after Antiochus Epiphanes. But I believe that it's Jesus. He returns to the earth for his 1,000-year millennial reign, and he personally cleanses the temple. And again, there's the river that comes up from the Temple Mount in Ezekiel that we could think of as a cleansing as well. Any questions? Thoughts?
Are you sure?
No, I'm not. This is my very best guess, but I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. So please think about these things. It's a lot of detail. I know it's a lot to think about, but look over that stuff and meditate on it and bring your wisdom next week, and we'll talk about the 70th week.